Good evening, everybody. Magandang gabi for our Pinoy alumni. It's with great pleasure. I would like to now invite Professor Rene Domingo for the webinar speech today. Prof, all yours.
Okay, good evening and good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar. I hope you're all safe. First of all, let me thank the AIM India Alumni Association, headed by Nikhil Kamat as host, for organizing this webinar series to help us cope with this crisis. So fortunately or unfortunately, I'm the first speaker of this series. Okay, so Nikhil, can I share my screen?
Yes, sir, you can. Yes.
Can you see it?
I can.
Okay,
Yes,
so I have 40 minutes to share with you my topic today, which is defensive and offensive strategies in the pandemic and post-pandemic environment. So this is not just about survival. I want us to share. I want to share with you ideas how to be 2 steps ahead of your competitors and your customers when the economy reopens sometime soon. Okay, so I'll split it into two parts, right? Okay, so before that, let me just say a few words about. Well, this is the topic I think that was shown earlier. I'll discuss quickly all of this later on. So we'll just split into defensive and offensive strategies. We're going to look at vital signs, pain points, extending core competencies, and delivering value. Okay, a little bit about myself. So this sharing of mine is actually a continuation of my writing career. Way back in the 90s, my first book, many of you recall, maybe you have copies of this, is entitled Quality Means Survival. So during those times in the 70s, 80s, a lot of companies were reeling from the Japanese competition who came in with quality products, and they got market share easily. So I wrote about, it's actually survival using quality. Huh? And then the next part is also, the next book I wrote is also about survival. This was, I co-wrote this with my friend, Mr. Santosa. You know, if you remember the Asian crisis of 97, a lot of Asian companies went down, right? But I noticed that there were some bright stars who were able to thrive after the Asian crisis. So they had, I documented their best practices, and I shared this with in a book called Turnaround Management, how these great companies survive from this financial calamity. I guess you know what my third book would be. It will be how do you survive this pandemic, you know, or post-pandemic. But that will come much later. You know, it takes years to write a book, and takes years to wait for this pandemic to finish. Anyway, as you well know, instead of writing a book, I've been sharing a lot of my ideas through social media, like Facebook and LinkedIn. And this is where I share in real time my ideas, because we need to manage this crisis in real time. We cannot wait for a book to be written, right? So that's the reason I'm in a hurry to share this in my social media, and also in some webinars like this. In case you haven't access my social media posts, or what I call pandemic posts, you can just go to hashtag RTD COVID-19 for both Facebook and LinkedIn. I'll be covering some of these ideas in this webinar, but I'm sure you get a lot more in the social media. Okay, so first of all, managing expectation, as you all learn in in AIM. By the way, I'm glad to see a lot of my former students for decades. Though you know, we're meeting during this crisis, I'm really very thrilled to be with you again, right? Of course, outside the campus, so to speak. Anyway, so as you can learn, as you have learned in AIM, the most important task of a manager is to ask questions, right? To ask the right questions. And then you find the answers or hire someone who knows the answers. So with the limited time that I have, 40 minutes, I'll just focus on helping you ask the right questions, right? I may not be able to give answers during this time on your specific corporate or industry problems. I'll try my best to do that with the remaining time. But well, hopefully after this webinar, you can meet with your board, your ExCom, ManCom, and brainstorm on what you heard today and decide your future, right? Plan your future, post-pandemic future. Okay, let's start with the first part. I'd like to focus a little bit more on the defensive side, right? You know, a strategy as in sports consists of both defense and offense, right? You can lose with poor defense, right? As in basketball or football, right? Okay, it's not always good offense. So you have to survive first before you can thrive, right? Especially in crisis like this. So our motto is live to fight another day, right? So how do you make sure that when the economy reopens, you're still around, right? And you can restart your business. This is very important before you can do any forward planning or offensive strategy. You should be healthy. I mean, the corporate should be healthy, right? Financially and operationally, ready to bounce back, right? So what are these key ideas to make sure you're ready to fight another day once this virus would have left us alone, right? As I mentioned in one of my posts, very simple. It's 2C plus 2S, right? A simple checklist, right? It's like vital signs when you go to emergency room, right? The first they check your pulse, your blood, your oxygen. So the same with business, right? So I basically cash, customers, staff, and suppliers, okay? This is what you have to ensure during the lockdown, right? When business is at a standstill, right? Okay, so cash first, right? Liquidity, huh? Okay, very short term, but very dangerous if you run out of this, right? So why is profit and sales not around, or market share? Well, forget about this 3 other KPIs or deliverables, right? At this point, sales, market share, and profits are not life critical, right? It's your liquidity, right? It's your liquidity. As you can see, a lot of companies now are folding up because they can't pay their loans. It's because of liquidity, huh? Big companies, big airlines, you know, are now declaring bankruptcy. Not because they don't have sale, because they don't have cash to pay for their bonds and loans and fixed costs, right? So the key principle in cash management is maintain liquidity to pay for your recurring expense during the lockdown, right? Because some of these are cash-based. That's very important. Secondly, don't incur unnecessary expense during this lockdown, okay? Because you don't have the cash to pay for this. And if there are necessary expenses to pay for during the lockdown, don't pay cash, right? Don't use your cash. Yeah? Use credit if the vendor or service provider will allow it, right? Okay, so control your liquidity, okay? So finally, on this item cash, another important thing is build up buffer cash, right? Not for the lockdown, but when you restart the business. You need cash when you restart, definitely, right? Okay, so you have to keep cash and build it up during the lockdown, okay? Because you have to pay for many cash items when you reopen the business. That's a reality, okay? So you cannot reopen your business without a buffer cash to restart. Okay, that's your first C. That's your first lifeline, right? Second lifeline is customers, right? You cannot reopen a business if all your customers are gone, right? So make sure during this lockdown, assure them that you'll be back in business. You can still deliver to them if the lockdown allows you. So keep in touch with them, keep the relationship alive. Even though there's no transaction, keep the relationship alive. So then when you bounce back with them, right? So this is key, right? This is key. Okay. Maybe just focus on your key customers. You know, the 80-20, the 20% that delivers 80% of your sales. Focus on those top 20. Okay, your key accounts, especially if you're B2B, right? B2C, it's a little bit challenged because B2C, there's so many of them. Okay, but for B2B, you focus on your key accounts. Secondly, your people are very important. Don't downsize, don't lay them off, right? Keep enough cash to keep them, especially your key staff, because you need these people when you reopen. You cannot hire people when you reopen. You cannot right size after downsizing, right? You cannot upsize after downsizing. Easy to downsize. It's very hard to upsize. Okay, so you may have lost the talent, the intellectual capital, right? So keep them in your facility. Make them useful work like housekeeping or training them. Okay, as long as you have liquidity to support them. Right? But postpone any layoff as much as possible, and keep them intact when you reopen. Okay, they're part of your family, right? They're not employees. They're part of family, right? Protect them. I mean, financially and health-wise, just like your family members. And fourthly, your suppliers. Well, this stakeholder is just as important as your customers. Without raw materials, especially key raw materials, you cannot reopen the business. There's nothing to sell. There's nothing to convert, right? Okay, you need key suppliers to be with you when you reopen. So take care of them. By the way, I forgot about customers. If customers are having financial difficulty, please do not collect your receivable. Postpone collection. If you're more liquid than your clients, you don't want to get them distressed, right? Okay. Same with suppliers. If you have payables with them, pay them, right? If you have enough liquidity, especially past due payables. Past due payables. It's your obligation to pay them now. Now, if you have enough liquidity, you can even advance payment for outstanding payables that are not yet due, right? To help them in their cash flow. Okay, so all of you should be liquid: the customer, your company, your suppliers. Okay, any of these three becomes illiquid, then you have a problem. You cannot reopen. Okay, so those are the vital signs. Those are the vital signs. Keep your chain running. Keep them afloat. Okay, next defensive strategy during lockdown. I'm sure in many countries, India, Philippines, you're not allowed to open shop unless you're in the vital industry, which we call wartime industry. This is actually a war. This pandemic war is a war against the virus. So, but there are exceptions. There are exceptions. If you're helping the frontliner, the healthcare industry, serving food, then you can be allowed to operate. And that's good because you'll be allowed to sell, right? And generate some cash during the lockdown. Okay, so if you can transform your processes to manufacture medical supplies, a lot of textile companies are now making masks and PPEs and gowns, then that will help you tide over this crisis financially. And the government will pay you, right? They have all this war chest to pay all these vital industries. You can produce medical equipment, fine and good, but this is kind of tough because very few companies can really produce ventilators. Only big manufacturing firms like GM, right? Car makers can produce medical equipment. Medical supplies, I forgot to mention. I just read about Lego. Lego, the toy maker. They converted some of their molding machine to be able to produce visors, PPEs, right? For health frontliners, plastic visors. So they easily do setup. It's like what we learn in Lean, SMED, quick setup. You can change products using a similar process. Okay, if you have medical facilities, if you're in real estate, you can rent out your place to become quarantine areas, rent it out to be field hospitals, okay? So you can generate some rental, right? Fees from this. Okay, we need space during this when you have to quarantine thousands of people. Hospitals are not good quarantine areas. They need flat spaces. So if you have idle land, idle buildings, idle hotels, convert, right, to medical facilities, and you'll be allowed to open and generate income. This is a very important strategy, especially if you're in the hotel business. We have no guests right now, right? Convert them to quarantine areas. Relief goods. If you're in food making, convert them to, instead of consumer goods, package relief goods, disaster goods for those in lockdown, right? Or any food for that matter, because it's not only relief. The whole population needs relief goods because they cannot go out, right? So if you can deliver and produce foods that can be delivered to those locked down, then you can be allowed to operate like in Philippines. Restaurants here, as long as you have delivery services, are allowed to operate. Okay, so it's a good defensive strategy. You have to reconfigure your of course, your packaging and your process, because you need packaging for delivery. And lastly, logistics. Right? So if you are, if you have trucks, you know, if you have cars, you have vehicles, use them to ferry vital goods, security forces, frontliners, if you're a bus company, right? So this one way to generate cash and at the same time help our needy frontliners. Okay, so those are what I call wartime industries. So this is kind of short term, right? You don't have to do this beyond the pandemic, but it can help you generate some cash and sales and operate and use your people, right? Instead of just making them idle. Okay, so another point I'd like to discuss is while you're in lockdown, you have to do some soul searching. I call this reality check about your business model, your assets. Okay, don't wait for the lockdown to find out that your everything you have is all obsolete, irrelevant to the post-pandemic environment. You know, VUCA. When VUCA changes the environment, your model becomes irrelevant. Even your supply chain, your markets. So it's about time, while you're not too busy, brainstorm with your mancom, right? Are we still keeping these assets? First of all, safety is important post-pandemic, right? Are your products still safe after this? If not, then you cannot reopen the business and expect to do more of the same or sell more of the same. Secondly, does it still provide value, right? Okay, in a post-pandemic world, right? It's still relevant. Is your service still relevant after this? So you really have to brainstorm this, not after the lockdown, but during the lockdown, right? Is it still strategic, or is it sunk cost that you have to write off? And is it viable? You know, the meaning of viable, I will discuss this again later on, is, you know, cost will go up. The cost of doing business will go up, right? And prices may come down, right? Because you have to do social distancing. Huh? So this is a margin squeeze, right? And your current products may no longer be viable even before the economy reopens. Huh? So you have to plan to replace this. Huh? While you're still not running the business, you have to replace your product right now. You cannot reopen if it's not viable, because your cost will be too high and the prices will be too low, right? Okay. Or maybe the prices are too high, people can't afford. And then you lose market, right? You lose market. So where do you apply this criteria? Well, examine all your products. Will it be post-pandemic ready, right? Okay. Especially airlines, they have a big problem. You cannot sell economy seats as is, right? That's gone. It's already obsolete, even before the airlines are allowed to fly again. Nobody will sit in an economy seat, right? Okay. Now, if they price that too high, nobody will pay for it, right? Remember, they're planning to remove the middle seats. You know what that means, right? It's like offering business class seat for an economy fare. And you cannot price it that way, right? Your capacity will be down by 40, 50%. Same with assets. Are your assets still usable, like cruise, luxury cruise? Are these ships still, you know, useful? All of them became outbreaks, right? And they're still in the ocean right now. They cannot call to port. No country would want them to land, right? So look at your assets. It's gonna be painful, right? You have to replace this immediately if you have big assets like this. Staff. Well, I'm against downsizing. Right? I'm not saying we should downsize and lay them off. They become irrelevant. What I'm referring to are talents and skills. Maybe the skills they have, the talents they have, are no longer relevant in the post-pandemic. You have to reskill them, huh? Or upskill. Okay, so you have to retrain them during the lockdown. Okay, for example, they don't know anything about health and safety. You have to train them on health and safety. How preparing food in a hygienic way. Maybe they're not conscious of that. Remember, hygiene becomes level up. We have to level up our hygiene practices after this. Okay. Secondly, business model. This includes demand chain, supply chain. Maybe your supply chain is so widespread. That's too risky, huh? Or you're so dependent on China or Italy or anywhere where places had outbreak. This chain can no longer operate once you reopen, right? You have to reconfigure your supply chain. Same with downstream, like your dealer, dealer, retailer, distributors. If they are at high risk, they're vulnerable because they're not pandemic ready. You have to reconfigure your downstream network. Okay, so examine all of this during your Mancom XCOM. Are they still gonna be relevant? Can they still assure safety and protection? Okay, you have to write them off. First from your minds and then painfully from your balance sheets, right? Okay, that's how it is. We have to take a hit. This is actually a win-lose. We have to lose, right? But you have to cut your losses, right? Don't keep on keeping legacy assets that no longer works, right? You know, that's what we do in IT. We get rid of legacy, replace them with the new technology. Don't keep legacy. It's more a problem than saving money, right? Okay, so we have to take a hit. Okay, next to defense is re-engineering the business model. You know, the new cost, I already mentioned this. You have to make sure that when you reopen, there should be minimal human contact, right? Customer to staff, staff to staff, staff to supplier. So many, you minimize this. More contacts mean more risk, right? This can happen the next 18 months until the vaccine is discovered, or indefinitely if we cannot find the vaccine. You have to reduce all contacts in your processes, right? Not only with customers, but between staff and suppliers. Interaction, minimize interaction, especially with social distancing. Now, can you deliver the same goods, the same services with minimal interaction? So that's a re-engineering question. How do you do this in the new normal, right? Because people don't want to interact anymore with us, but they want your goods and services. This is going to be a challenge. Transport, you minimize transport because when there's a lockdown, okay, commerce stops, right? So if your business has a lot of transport processes, then they're at high risk. Once a lockdown, let's say there's a second wave of pandemic, then your business stops again, right? Because you're so dependent on moving things a lot, right? So minimize your transport. And I have a strategy for this, right? Movement, the same movement of people. When people move, they become carriers, various carriers of virus, right? So minimize movement of people, right? I'm not saying they should not move, but minimize to reduce the risk and lower your vulnerability. Traceable, make your process traceable because your customers will want you to trace where did this come from. Or you as a buyer, you will ask your supply chain, where did this material come from? Did it come from an infectious place? So traceability will be key cost of doing business. It's going to be expensive, right? We need more information. This is not about crowdsourcing or data science. This is hardcore, right? Tracking of people, right? Okay, specific to your business, your customers, your suppliers, your raw materials, and of course related to traceability, transparency. People should know where things are coming from, where people are coming from. So another investment in information management. New information must support your system. And low dependency, meaning you cannot be dependent on few suppliers, on few materials, right? Okay, so you cannot depend. So make sure that you reduce dependency on a few customers, few suppliers, few materials, because once there's a lockdown, your market is gone, your supply chain is gone, your logistics is gone, right? if there's only one of them. I'm not talking too many backups, right? I will talk about that later on. But do not rely on one. You can rely on 2 or 3, but not one, right? And you know, many companies stop production because they're all reliant on China's factory, right? And that was a big blow, right? They're too dependent on one source, China, and worse, some of them are so dependent on Wuhan, right? So when Wuhan locked down, a lot of car companies stopped, right? So we cannot have a repeat of this when you open shop. So where do you apply this things? Product, services, processes, supply chain, demand chain, and logistics, right? So meet your MANCOM, XCOM, examine all of these parts of your business model and make sure they comply with this. They're compliant, right? Or they would be compliant. The question is, can you afford the cost, right? That's a big question mark. This is high cost, right? Okay, you have to be creative about this so you can manage the cost. And of course, the pricing, which I will talk about, because price will go up, right? If your cost goes up, if you pass this on cost to the client, they may not afford it, or they may not want to pay for it. So this is a dilemma when in the new normal, right? Costs are high, prices are gonna be high, but customers may not be willing to pay, right? Then you lose sales. You cannot recover your costs. So it's chicken and egg. So you really need to do a lot of defensive strategic thinking with regards to this new so-called new normal. It's not gonna be normal. It's very abnormal, right? It's not your usual way of doing business. Okay, so traceability, remove the moving parts. So you have to trace raw material, deliveries, product, stuff. So anything that moves in your business, you have to track them, right? Where did they, especially materials, right? Especially people. Huh? Are you contaminated? Are you a virus carrier? Because any of these 7 could be carriers of the virus, right? And you as a producer, as a processor, would want to be assured that you get the right material. And as customers, you want to be assured that you get the right products, right? Traceability, origin. It's not just about where the materials came from. Did it come from a safe place? I think that's a question of traceability. Right? Okay, to help you cut costs, you can use available technologies. This is the beauty of our era. We have available technologies to help us in traceability and transparency. You can use thermal scan, webcam, high-speed broadband, right? Of course, you can use RFID, right? You can use drone, right? You can use blockchain. Of course, this is the potential blockchain. It can trace anything, not just money, right? It can trace products, people, right? So you can always work backwards, where anything came from, right? You can use AI, right? And you can use other technology like crowdsourcing, if you will. So again, discuss this with your management team. Which technologies we can use to lower the cost of this new way of doing things like traceability and transparency. Okay, so best practices for supply chain and demand chain risk reduction. Okay, when you select vendors in the new normal, make sure they have a business continuity plan. Okay, the new supply chain strategy is not about cost reduction. It's gonna be risk reduction. Okay, so make sure they have BCP. Don't buy from a vendor that doesn't have BCP, even though his merchandise is low cost, because this is high risk for you. If it doesn't have continuity plans, you're the ones who will get into trouble when a crisis happens again, whether it's a pandemic or hurricane, or floods, tsunami. Okay, dual sourcing instead of single sourcing. Make sure you have a backup. But I do not recommend multi-sourcing, right? Because then you have a lot of moving parts. Stick to 2. 3 would be okay, but 2 is I think ideal in a post-pandemic world. So you can source from China and probably source from Europe. Now you have 2 sources, but don't source from all over the world. Okay, just 2. Get 2 good suppliers, 2 good regions, right? Multimodal. Make sure you have a plan B. When things go wrong, you can use land, you can use another road, you can use air, you can use ship, right? Make sure you're that ready, right? And you know the costing already. It's not emergency delivery. You have a plan B. In other words, you have escape route. Plan your escape route, right? If there's a lockdown, how do I deliver my goods? It's already in your plan. It's not crisis management. You're disaster ready. This is not a disaster response. Huh? You know, a lot of people not doing disaster response. They're air shipping everywhere. They don't know another route to do this. Now, if you have a BCP, you can plan this ahead of time. Collocate your suppliers. The closer they are, the less risk. I taught you this. I teach this in Lean for you guys who attended my elective. The closer you are to your supply chain, the less risk, right? Not only of traffic or weather, of breakdowns, but also of lockdowns, right? Because if they're closer to you, they may continue serving you even during lockdowns because they're nearby, right? Insourcing, yeah, you have to implode instead of explode. Right? Get your partners back, get your processes back. This is opposite of outsourcing. This is the problem of people who did a lot of outsourcing. Huh? All countries have stopped production, right? So if you're all over the place, then you stop also because your bottleneck is outside your business. It's not in your plant. It's there, right? It's outside, and you have no control. So you'll be a tail wagging the dog. Your supply chain will be wagging you or stopping you. Okay, key to this, the insight is don't use exotic material. Yeah? Use standard parts and materials. Huh? Because once that exotic materials comes from a certain country, there's no way to find a substitute, right? So tell your designers, your R&D people, come up with a wonderful product with good design, high variety, but don't proliferate the parts. Don't use exotic materials that come from exotic places, huh? Or faraway places. Okay, this is the problem with a lot of our smartphone. All the rare earths, the rare metals comes from China, right? Once that rare metals are short, right, because of any reason, then you cannot produce any smartphone or any electronic product for that matter. Okay, so this is key to design. This is a design strategy. Okay, so before I go to offensive, so a little bit on post-pandemic community BCP. Okay, succession planning, right? So once you're stranded, who's in command? It's like military. Huh? The chain of command should be already established. Like your president is locked down in some country, who takes over, right? Okay, your production manager got infected or got quarantined. So who's gonna run the factory? So decide this already, right? Because this can happen. Huh? This can happen. Because a lot of executives are stranded abroad. They cannot fly back to their home base. So who's running the company, right? You cannot run a company with Zoom, right? Okay, you have to run it in person. Information systems, yes, we do a lot of this. You know, a lot of BCP has to do with IT. You have multi-site, you have cloud, but I'm not talking of that. I'm talking about broadband, right? Make sure you have high speed, ready for stay at home, you know, work at home configuration. Because if you let your people work at home, but you don't have a high-speed broadband, then they cannot work at home. This is what happens to a lot of business process outsourcing. Their staff cannot work at home because their home broadband is so slow, right? They have to stay in their offices and stay in and live in their offices. Lack of planning. This is what I call lack of planning. Workforce planning. What happens if a lot of your people are locked in their homes? Who will run the plant, right? Make sure you have a skeletal force who can stay in, right? This already is part of BCP. Huh? Okay, how many do you need to stay in the factory? How many can work at home? So you still run your factory in a normal way. So this is your plan B before another pandemic happens, right? Of course, ideally they should all work in the offices. Supply chain, I think I already mentioned this. Can you make sure they're collocated? You're not dependent on one. You can be dependent on two. Same with demand chain, right? Okay. Make sure they are protected. They're BCP, right? Okay. So with the last 10 minutes, let me just focus on offensive, converting problems to opportunities, right? So again, in crisis innovation, this is kind of challenging. This is more challenging than digital transformation, right? A lot of this has to do with social innovation because you're gonna change behavior, right? How do you innovate? Huh? Behavior of the market. How do you adapt? So there'll be new fears, new pain points, new expectations, and new needs, right? Because of this traumatic experience. Now, these are not problems. These are opportunities. If you're a marketing guy, if you're a R&D guy, huh? All problems are are the way to start new enterprises, right? All enterprises started because of a problem, right? Not because of opportunity. It became opportunity because they're able to convert. So new markets, new customers, new products, new services, right? So I'll discuss this, right? Okay, so how do you be 2 steps ahead, right? You're developing your blue ocean, right? While you're in lockdown, right? Where's the blue ocean, right? You spot your blue ocean before the economy reopens, right? Okay, but you cannot do this from scratch. You have to start up with your offensive strategy quickly, right? Because you cannot lose time. So you have to leverage whatever you have now, your core competence, your asset. You have extended, make them COVID secure, crisis proof, right? Okay. The advantage of using your core competence instead of acquiring new core competence, you can do rapid product development, right? You have short learning curve because you're already in that space. You need minimal investment in manpower, and of course you can do fast scaling, and time to market is very short, right? So don't invent the wheel, right? Use your whatever strengths you have. Okay, so discuss again with your mancom what are our strengths that we can extend to new products, to new markets, to serve the new normal, right? Okay, don't think about new investments. You have new facilities or new plans. So extend the product, extend the service, extend your process, whatever you have, right? Extend your people talent. Huh? They can be extended to new talents, to new skills. Extend your facilities. You can repurpose them. You can reuse them for other needs, right? You can have idle land, factories. So what you want to do is increase share of wallet. Share of wallet is good because you don't create new markets. Share of wallet means the same market, same customer, but you're addressing other needs of that thing. So it's again extending your core market. You're not going into new markets. It's still your core market, but you're increasing your share of wallet. Repurpose, right? Repurpose your assets, your products, so it can be used for other needs. So you don't have to start with at the start, right? Just repurpose your machines, like what Lego did, right? It repurposed its plastic molding from toys to visors, right? Surgical visors, medical visors. That's what we call repurposing. So they can easily convert. They can easily convert their facilities to become ready in the new normal. And productization, right? Extend your product. Products to new products, service to new services. Convert your service to a product, convert your product to services to minimize transport and movement. Okay? Extend your people. Let them create new values, right? Okay? Let them create new businesses. Your backroom can be frontliners, right? Your backroom can become creators of new wealth. Extend your facilities, productize your facilities, convert your idle land into rentable quarantine areas, for example, or field hospital. Right? You have a lot of idle space, doing nothing. Right? Productize them, convert them into rentable space. We need a lot of space in the new normal because of social distancing. Remember that. A lot of space, a lot of real estate will be needed. Okay, so this is my last slide, and I wanted to discuss this because I think everybody's going on this bandwagon, right? Okay, the solution in the new normal is just do everything online, and that's over, right? No need for strategy. Well, easier said than done, right? A lot of businesses cannot be converted to online, right? You need physical contact, right? So there you have to be creative about that, right? Okay. You cannot do telemedicine. Robotic surgery is only limited to a few cases. Right? You need a surgeon to, to operate on you. Huh? You need a barber to cut your hair, right? So forget about this. Everything becomes online. Maybe webinars like this education can be, but I think most services cannot be done online, right? Only if you're selling information, yes, online. The rest, you have to deliver. Even e-commerce. E-commerce is not digital. A lot of e-commerce is physical, right? You need trucks. You need packaging, right? E-commerce is 10% online. 90% of e-commerce is logistics. It's bricks and mortar, by the way, right? So if you want to be in Amazon, it's not pure digital play. It's not pure digital play. There's no such thing, right? So very few can really be converted to online. Huh? So what are the challenges? One is the customer may perceive it as low value, right? Low value because they don't see a person. They don't see a frontliner. They want to see a person. That's why a lot of people don't want to use the ATM. They want to see a teller, right? They want to see a teller. I want to see a teller. I don't want to talk to an ATM to get my cash or to deposit something. So there are segments like that, right? That they see online as lower quality, right? And this is going to be a problem. If they see it as lower quality, they will demand a lower price, right? They will demand a lower price, maybe 1/2 or 1/10. Now you're going to have a problem, right? Huh? You have to, because they decide the price. The value for money becomes lower, so they demand lower price for anything online. Secondly, this will have an impact on sales, right? You do something online, you may lose your market, right? They want offline, they want face-to-face. So I'm not saying this is not possible, but review your business model. Huh? Can you really convert to online? What's the implication in terms of market share, right? Of customer loyalty, right? Or perceived value, right? Last, of course, on the cost side, it's not easy. You need high system requirements. Your typical computer cannot do this when you convert to online. Okay, you need the bandwidth of BPOs, right? You know the BPO, they have high technology. Huh? That's the real online business, the BPO. Reliable systems, backups, everything. Huh? The model is BPO, but most companies don't have the same technology level as the BPO, right? Because you're not doing this as your core business. You cannot suddenly switch to online if you're not ready with your system. The other problem is the high risk of breakdown on both sides, supplier, service provider, and customer. Huh? So online needs two systems, your system and the system of the customer. You can have a high reliable system, but the system of the customer is not reliable. There's no transaction. Your business will not fly, right? So you need high level of requirements on both sides, on the buyer and the seller. So the risk management is important. Business continuity is not only on your side, also on the customer side, right? When you do online. Like right now, you're dependent on my broadband. This webinar is dependent on your broadband speed, right? If one of you slows down, you can't hear me, right? So this is the problem. This is the challenge, right? I can have high broadband, high speed, but you're low speed. We may not communicate in this webinar, right? So you have to have the same quality. Right? And lastly, very slow learning curve. This is new to many companies. Huh? That's why when a lot of companies try to imitate Amazon, they cannot catch up, right? Imagine Walmart trying to imitate Amazon. No, Walmart wasn't geared for e-commerce. But they try to imitate Amazon. They cannot catch up. Huh? Walmart, a big company, huh? Very slow learning curve. They could not catch up with Jeff Bezos, huh? Who started digital e-commerce. He was ahead, right? It took him 10 years. He lost money for 10 years learning this thing, right? Imagine that. He lost money, right? How can you do this overnight? Huh? A lot of startups, digital, lose money because they have to learn the ropes, right? They have to learn the ropes. So be careful about going online and solving the problem, throwing these online solutions to all problems. Huh? It may or may not work. Yeah? I'm not discouraging you, but look at this critically, right? This is not a panacea, right? A cure-all for all our aims. Okay, so I can see my time. It's already 7:10. Nikhil, can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Are we okay with my time, or want me to continue, or what? That's my last slide.
No, you want to add on something, sir, or you have?
Well, I can summarize for a few minutes,
Please,
right?
you can go ahead. Please do.
Okay, so just a word of caution, right? So in this crisis, people are just worried about survival, right? But survival is short term. This is just during the lockdown of a few months, right? But what happens after the lockdown, when the economy reopens? Are you still alive? Huh? Maybe you will not survive the post-pandemic. You can survive the pandemic, but not the post-pandemic. Huh? So during the crisis, you should be doing two plans, right? Pandemic strategy and post-pandemic. Equally important. Equally important, right? Huh? Don't think short term. You have to look long term. Long term will be your survival. Is your business relevant still, right? In the new normal. Huh? Okay, this is very key. It's just important as liquidity, right? You lose cash, you fold up. You lose your product, you also fold up, right? It's the same effect, right? So don't just look at cash or bailouts or doleouts from the government. That's not enough. The government can give you cash or doleout, but it cannot make your product relevant, right? The government cannot support you on that angle, right? Nobody can help you, right? Only you will keep your product relevant to your market, right? There is no aid on that, right? Parliament, Congress cannot help you on that, right? No amount of money can make your business model viable or relevant, okay? They can only throw money at you, okay? But that's not assurance. Liquidity is not assurance of continuous survival in the post-pandemic. You have to think, you have to strategize right now, right? Will I still be relevant, okay? Losing your product is the biggest loss, right? It's not losing money. It's not losing cash. It's losing your product because you're no longer viable. Huh? Think about the airlines. Think about the cruise line, luxury cruise. Think about movie houses. Right? Think about mass transport. Okay, these are all in jeopardy. Right? Okay, look at resorts. You need or malls. Right? A lot of people in malls or resorts. Huh? A lot of people in resort. They need crowds. They need congestion. Huh? Any business that relies on crowds and congestion and you don't have social distancing, it will be in trouble, right? How do you reconfigure amusement park, okay? Or a sports stadium, rock concerts, right? Rock concerts, sports, okay? You need crowds to keep this business alive, but that's gone. You cannot have a crowd more than 10. Remember the goal, not 10, more than 10. It's a crowd, more than 10 is a crowd. But we have crowds of 10,000 in most businesses. In luxury cruise, you have 3,000, right? A stadium can easily fill 10,000. So think about this. Think about this. Malls, to make a mall survive, you need thousands of people inside the mall to make the businesses inside survive. So how do you maintain social distancing with these kinds of business model that depends on crowds and congestion, right? Especially the B2C, right? B2B may be no problem because you don't have crowds. B2B businesses don't depend on crowds, right? But the B2C, this will be in trouble. Well, B2B will be in trouble because if your B2B client is a B2C client, then once he gets into trouble, then you also get into trouble, right? Okay, so these are the challenges, okay? Okay, so those are the questions I'd like to leave you with. Okay, maybe I did not give enough answers, but questions you'd like to ask your Mancom, right? How do we thrive in the post-pandemic new normal? Okay, Nikhil, that's about all.
Yeah.
To conclude.
Sir, you said the word questions, and there's a plethora of questions here.
Okay, just pick a couple. It's up to you.
You don't know. I will give you, it's a plethora of questions, a Pandora's box, but the early bird is Alan from MBA 2008.
Sure.
And he said, up to what extent can companies pass on additional costs of doing business to their customers post-COVID?
Okay, good question. In fact, I have a slide on that, but I don't want to prolong that. This is economics, right? We call it value for money, right? Okay, I'm about to come out with a post on Facebook maybe tomorrow on this. You preempted me. Okay, so my answer to this is a question, right? See, this is how a good professor answer a question with another question, right? Okay, so here's the question, right? If I double the price, right? If I double the price, let's say economy class, right? Let's say you're paying $300. Now you're gonna pay $600, right? Okay. How high can you go? Because you have to recover the cost of empty seats, right? They have to fly empty seats because of social distancing. Yeah, just a hypothetical example, right? So the question is, before I was paying 300, now I'm gonna pay 600. So the premium is now 300, another $300. So what is the question? Is that 300 add-on, worth the value of protection and safety, right? Will that be perceived by the passenger as, oh, this is insurance. I'm gonna pay insurance for my health and my life. It's worth paying, right? So how high can you go depends on the value perceived, right? I'm not saying you should double your price, right? Let's say extra packaging, right? You charge him for extra packaging because you want to protect the product from contamination. And then you charge him 20% more, right? the price will go up because of extra protection. Now, will the buyer or the consumer perceive that as equal to the value of the protection? Am I making sense, right? So it depends on the business you're in, right? And the value, the protection they need, right? Okay. Of course, in airline, we buy insurance, right? When you board the flight, we buy insurance, because that's protection for us. It adds to the cost of the flight, right? We always buy insurance, right? So it's similar to that argument. Similar to that argument. I hope that answers the question.
No, sir, I have put them on mute, so they can't answer you back. So
Okay.
we can go to the next question. Okay, sir. This is a question from Venu. He says that AIM has always adopted the best in the world, yet its USP has been CP, class participation. In this world, it's a good question. Since education is remote, what change you foresee?
Not that much. Interestingly, because last 2 weeks I just conducted online classes with my degree program, ME. I'm gonna have EMBA later on, and surprisingly, we had good participation. I was able to record their participation. Okay, I can see them all in one screen compared to a case room. Okay, so it's still possible in an online environment to do CP, right? But of course, we in AIM we now lowered the weight of CP. We give more weight for homework assignments because of the crisis, right? Okay, we're more liberal about this, right? But we still need CP. We need presence, right? Even online, we need participation. Online doesn't mean asynchronous, right? We need synchronous participation, real time, just like in the campus, right? Okay, that's it. That's the
next
answer.
question. Vasu Rao, MBM 87. He
Sure.
said, major trust issues with China. What will happen to China now? And where will the fresh new investment relocations happen?
I told you this is asking the professor what's the answer to the case, right? Well, I can answer that with a question before I end the class, right? But anyway, I think the trend would be something like this. People will be less dependent on any region, not only China. Yeah? You know, the outbreak now is in Europe and US, right? It's the same. Could be Mexico and Canada, right? Need not be China, right? So the question is disperse your supply chain, right? Disperse your supply chain. Even out, right? We're so dependent on China, and China is so dependent on us. So when China closes, the world stops, right? This is the problem with this pandemic, right? We're so dependent on this epicenter of the outbreak. So China will spread its eggs, right? And we will all spread our eggs, our outsourcing, probably go to Southeast Asia, you know, to the other, to Taiwan, Korea, you know. So it's not gonna be a cost reduction. It's gonna be a risk reduction, right? Because high risk actually means high cost, right? There's a hidden cost to high risk. Okay, we call that the cost of doing business, right? Cost of doing business, or business continuity is a high cost, or business discontinuity is the biggest cost of outsourcing, right? It's not the cost of labor. Forget about cost of labor. It's the cost of discontinuity when something happens. This is the problem, remember, in Thailand, when there was floods there. So many outsourced in Thailand. So when there was a flood in Thailand, the whole supply chain of many Japanese companies just stopped, right? From cameras to automobile, right? So we have to spread. We have to manage the risk. Manage the risk. Okay, that's
Sir, next question is Hum Bhandari, MDM course, Nepal. He says, how can we apply this idea to not-for-profit organizations?
Well, not-for-profit will be similar in terms of operation. Not-for-profit are actually doing processes, right? You source something, except you don't make profit. It's the same. You have supply chain, you have demand chain, right? Except you don't charge for profit. But so you can be disrupted just like a commercial enterprise, right? So you really have to take care of your supply chain. Let's say you're a cooperative, right? Okay, cooperative is not supposed to make money. They distribute it to their members. But cooperatives are into businesses like farming, you know, merchandising, trading. So the risks are the same as any for-profit businesses doing this in the same industry, right? they're into finance, right? NGOs are into finance, right? So you have the same problem. So it applies perfectly to any industry, whether for-profit or non-profit or social enterprise, so to speak. Social enterprise have people. You have movement of people. You have to trace people. Where did this come? Where are you coming from? It's the same. Maybe you don't have customers, but you have members. You sell to members. So members are also customers. You apply. They wear the hat of customers, right? The so-called members. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Sir, next question from Vivek Mehta. He says, in the post-wartime will be a period of immense trust deficit. Do you believe people in both ends of the supply chain will be transparent, especially since cash is in short supply and liquidity is at a premium?
Well, as I mentioned in some of my FB posts, it's going to be a slow start, right? Forget about what politicians say, we can jumpstart the economy. It's not going to jump, right? It's going to be a very slow start, right? Nobody can jump when the gates are open, right? Why? Why is it a slow start? Because everybody will be starting slow. Your supply chain will be starting slow. Your demand chain, buyers, sellers will be starting, even though you're fast, right? Let's say you're fast, you can jumpstart your business, but the others are starting slow. You have to be at the same speed, right? That's the problem, right? So we have to wait for, it's like post-war, as I mentioned in one of my, after a war, and this is like after the war, you need several years before you normalize commerce and the economy. It cannot restart in the next week, right? No way, right? This is not a 3-day holiday. This is a 6-month holiday, right? Of lockdown, right? Everything was shuttered, right? It's not gonna be the same when we reopen our business. It's gonna be a slow start. That's a given. We cannot jumpstart anything. Yes, Nikhil.
Yeah, sir. Next question is, we are in services business, recruitment process outsourcing in India. Any thoughts on impact on recruitment?
Well, yes and no, because recruitment means, some businesses will mean less people, some will mean more people, right? If your clients are going online, definitely they need less people, right? But if they're gonna do social distancing, you have a wider space, right, to manage, maybe they need more people. Especially if you're in a brick and mortar, you have to do a lot of health check, additional process to check incoming people. Then you have to hire more people to check more people, right? So it depends on which industry they're catering to, right? Okay.
Sir, next question is from Blaise Costabile. He says, survival is
Yes.
future is uncertain. Can be many more lockdowns, because you're talking about W lockdown, right? At least till we get a vaccine. So will we have to relook our strategy over 6 months rather than 2 years window?
Forget about this timeline, right? This vaccine, it depends on many things, right? Some say it's 6 months, some say it's 18 months. You cannot do planning based on this. It's gonna be indefinite, right? The 1918 Spanish flu, if you remember that killed 50 million. I keep saying this in my Facebook and LinkedIn. Killed 50 million people. It's now 2020. There's still no vaccine. There's still no vaccine. That's almost 100 years ago, right? So think about that. That's your worst scenario. That's your worst scenario. We may or may not discover. Maybe we have technology. We have supercomputers. We know we have the DNA, right? Maybe it's a little bit faster, but we cannot hurry this, right? We cannot plan. Just plan based on protection, right? Based on protection. Plan your products to be protected from any virus with or without vaccine, right? Because the world is changing. This virus keep coming out, right? This corona COVID-19 will be replaced by COVID-20, right? Now we have to find another vaccine, right? For COVID-20. Then we have COVID-21, right? So it's a never-ending game, right? Because we're getting closer to wildlife. This pandemic will recur more often than before, right? And then it's a treadmill. So the best thing is COVID-proof your products and services, right? We don't wait for this vaccine. It's like wishing, right? Wishing for good luck. We'll find it in 6 months. Okay. Yes.
For someone who is in travel, passengers transport, does it mean they need to pivot?
It depends on viability, right? If you're in mass transit, you have to reconfigure, right? But again, going back to the earlier question, if you're gonna double the price because you have to reconfigure with wider space, will customers buy your product? Will they buy the ticket? If not, then you have to pivot, right? But if they can pay, right? They're willing to pay more. You don't have to pivot. Just reconfigure your facilities, your vehicles, right? So that's my it's conditional, right? On the market, are they willing to pay the price of protection, right? Once you reconfigure your facility into that is social distancing compliant. Okay, that's my answer.
Last three questions, sir.
Last three questions, okay.
Because there are many more, but then it'll be your dinner time also.
No problem,
no
problem.
It's okay, okay. Antona Gyavali from Nepal. Her question is, what talents and skills might not be as relevant as it was pre-pandemic? And is it the right time to restructure our company?
Well, I don't know what business is in, but it's hard to say which talent will be relevant, irrelevant. But I think what will be relevant will be easier to answer, right? Okay, relevant will be protection, be it traceability, if you're in the traceability business, if you're in the health sector, right? Definitely, people will be very conscious. If you're in the, let's say traceability is a big business, right? Because that's not about healthcare. We do traceability in supply chain, even prior to this pandemic, right? So people in RFID, drone, right? Business, those are the talents. We'll be watching over everyone. Video cam, watching people over screens, right? So those talents will be important. AI would be important because we have to monitor millions of people moving about, right? Like what they do in China, right? So those talents become very important. I don't know what will become irrelevant. Okay, there are many probably, right? But those are some of the things that could become more relevant. Yes.
Sir, Arlene Tan has asked a question. How can we reconfigure queuing systems for post-pandemic environment?
Queuing.
Yeah.
Well, queuing is still queuing. The only problem with queuing is you need distance, right? So what will happen to queue? It will be same length but fewer people, right? So the capacity will be much less, right? Let's say a bank can entertain 20 customers at a time, right? Without social distancing, max, right? Now with social distancing, let's say that is the new protocol, only 10 can be allowed inside, right? So servicing time will become longer, right? Waiting time will become longer. That's the cost of doing business. Same for the bank, same for the client. They'll be more patient about this, right? Because that's protection for them, right? They want to get into to crowd with other bank clients. Same with malls and department stores, right? I'm sure there will be a quota, they will quota the entering clients, right? So it becomes just in time. 10 goes in, 10 comes out, 10 goes in, 10 comes out. It's like just in time. You don't buffer. You don't hoard inside the facility. Unlike parking, parking, people keep letting cars park inside when there's no parking space. Now you have congestion, right? You have pollution inside parking spaces. That may not be the case anymore. So what goes in comes out, right? 10 goes in, 10 comes out. Just like just in time, the Toyota system. Yes.
Sir, Anurag Goel, MM 2011, when do you see the old normal coming back and taking over new normal? And
again, old normal coming back?
And taking over new normal. And with that, I would like to add a question of June Santos. Will there be a W-shaped recovery? So you can answer both of them.
Okay. New normal, there's no new normal. When this terrorist attack occurred, right? Everybody became conscious about security, right? So it became the new normal. People keep checking visitors, right? Security check became more universal in airports and in facilities. We never went back to this pre-terrorist days, right? So once a new VUCA event happened, right? Society changes, and that becomes the new normal. You cannot go back to those unsecured environment. So the same with pandemic. Once we have this pandemic, the problem with this pandemic is nobody has experience of the 1918 pandemic, right? People forgot about it. Nobody was born in 1918 except a few few guys, right? We have no memories about this, right? So we forget. So we have a repeat of this, right? We repeat the same mistake of the 1918 pandemic. So I think once we have this trauma, our generation will not experience the old normal, at least, right? Maybe our great grandchildren will forget about this problem and repeat our same mistake, right? Then the old normal will happen, right? And it becomes a vicious cycle, right? So for our generation, our children's generation, I think the old normal will not come back because we will remember this trauma, right? Yes, Nikhil.
Sure. The question is from Sarosh Nicholas. How to carry out B2B sales activities for big ticket sales where no face time with the prospect is possible in the medium term?
Well, this is a judgment call because you need the relationships in B2B, right? If it's online, there's no face-to-face. It's hard to find out whether the partner, we call it a B2B partner. It's not, we don't call him a client, right? A B2B client is a partner, right? A business partner, right? Okay. So you need to know this person, right? Before you shake hands, right? Well, the problem, can you shake hands digitally, right? That's a big problem. You have to know this person. So you have to vet these guys by some other means. I think 2 meters is enough, right? You can still meet this new prospect in the physical world as long as you keep 6 meters, 6 feet apart. That's still possible. You don't have to get new clients and digitally. As long as you maintain that space, get to know these guys. Yes, that's my answer.
Yeah. So now last question. One is from Gautam Mehrotra and that is from Michael Sherwin. Gautam Mehrotra says, Prof, this is on a serious note. Will you prefer to go to a barber stroke salon who would be taking all precautions possible post the lockdown is over? And as a businessman, how can I track my staff in this business?
Okay. You see, this is the problem with high touch businesses, like barbershop. I saw one in Georgia because Georgia reopened, I think 2 days ago, and I saw some barbershop open there, and they were all wearing PPE, right? Masks and everything. It's kind of awkward. I just don't know whether they will have the same clients, but if you want to think out of the box, right? This is what I'm saying, convert a service into a product, right? Why don't you just sell a kit so that people can cut their own hair, right? Something like that. Productize your service. So in other words, it becomes a self-service. That's a basic principle of what I'm saying in terms of crisis innovation, right? Forget about your legacy process, right? It may no longer work. Convert your service into a product so that he can do self-service. Does that answer the question? I hope.
Somebody says cut your own hair.
Exactly, cut your own hair. Yeah, it's like repairman. I was about to say it, but I didn't have time earlier. Let's say you have a product, electronic product, gadget, or sewing machine, or computer. When things break down, you call a repairman, right? And then the repairman, your main complaint with the repairman is the high cost, right? High cost. Now the complaint of after the pandemic, it's not only high cost. He could be infected, right? You don't want a repairman, a stranger inside your house, right? What's the solution? Convert your product into a serviceable product, user serviceable, right? Okay. It's also good for the environment, right? By the way, it saves you money and it saves human contact with this outsider entering your house, right? Yes.
And the last question to Michael Sherwin McIntyre. For businesses and industries that are extremely affected, and it seems it's very long, dark tunnel ahead, do you think it's still worth it to continue and fight it out, or already do the exit strategy, wind it out, close shop, and just start new venture?
Yes. That's my second slide. Take a hit, sunk cost, right? You have to take a hit. Reconfigure, right? Maybe because of that, you discover new blue ocean. Maybe taking a hit and writing off your legacy is a good decision. You may discover new businesses by doing that, right? It's same as Nokia. Remember Nokia? They were into paper, pulp, right? And they said there's no future in paper and lumber. let's go to electronics. And they became the pioneer in cell phone. Remember that? They have to give up their legacy business of forestry, right? Let's go to electronics. It's a small section of Nokia at that time, the cell phone telecommunication department. So they scaled that, and that became their core business. That became their core business. Okay. Of course, now it's yes, please.
So one last question, because I missed that. Paresh, how will bottom of the pyramid respond to changing business models where everyone is trying to go online and deliver a value proposition?
Well, this is a big problem, and everybody is going into the same direction. The value you lose value, right? You lose value, right? Okay. So maybe you have to innovate your products. You can still go face to face, and you may be given value. Remember when products were handmade, and people cannot afford handmade products, and then here comes the Industrial Revolution with mass production. Thanks to Eli Whitney and Henry Ford, now they can mass produce anything. So prices went down. So the market went up, right? Because it's affordable. Now what's happening now? Nobody wants to buy manufactured product. They want something handmade. They want something crude. They want something custom. And then they're willing to pay the price for something traditional. Okay? So this is what's gonna happen. Anything online will be commoditized, right? It will be perceived as low value. People will long for face-to-face. That's your blue ocean, right? But you have to deliver this face-to-face product in a very protected and safe environment. That's the innovation. How do you do that? You have to use technology for that. I don't know. That's the question I'm willing to ask the group, right? Can you re-engineer a traditional product so that it complies with the new normal, right? Expectation. That's the question, right? It's not going online. Online is not your panacea, right? As I told you. It can be it's got to be a big problem, right? Everybody goes into online.
Sir, your personal thoughts, will AIM go for online learning in future? Is it going to be?
Well, it's not AIM. It's the industry. It's the market, right? Yeah. We're always market driven as a business school, right? We listen to the market, right? We cope. We don't dictate, right? Our courses are getting shorter and shorter, not because we want it to be shorter, right? Our courses came from full-time, now it's becoming part-time. But this is what the market wants, right? Shorter programs, part-time programs. So before you guys, when you were in AIM, all we had were what? Full-time, right? Full-time degree programs and full-time executive program. Huh? After that, we converted to part-time evening classes. Before, we had no evening classes. We had no Saturday classes. So we listen to the market, right? What the market wants, that's how we configure, right? So if the market wants more online, then we shift towards that, right? More towards online. But we will not give up probably our offline case method, classroom-based offerings, because there's still a market for that. Well, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Professor, for answering most of the questions.
Well, I hope I answered most of them. Thank you too, Nicky, for hosting and organizing this.
Thank you, sir. And we'll definitely get in touch later.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Bye, sir. Bye.
Good to see you all.